The meeting room of the United Nations Security Council fills gradually, diplomats walking in with the practiced calm of people used to high-stakes negotiations. But this time, the stakes seem sharper, the tone heavier, the urgency unmistakable. In New York, far from Yemen's mountains and coastlines, the world's most powerful diplomatic body convenes to address a conflict that continues to spill across borders, across waters, and across the fragile lines of international law. Today's gathering is not routine. It is the Council making yet another attempt to rein in a crisis that has repeatedly defied its resolutions, its warnings, and its sanctions. As the delegates settle into their seats and the Council chamber quiets down, the sense of expectation builds. The international community is watching again because the issue at hand is not only about Yemen's civil war, nor only about regional rivalries. It is about international navigation, the safety of commercial shipping lanes, the transfer of weapons across a country under embargo, and the expanding ambitions of a group that has become a powerful player in regional geopolitics, Yemen's Houthi movement. The Council's agenda today focuses on escalating cross-border and maritime attack strikes that have grown bolder, reached farther, and targeted not only military assets but civilian infrastructure and global shipping routes. Diplomats know they are meeting at a time when tensions across the Middle East are already high. Since the outbreak of the Gaza conflict in October 2023, the Houthis have declared that they are acting in what they call solidarity, extending their operations into the Red Sea and beyond. Their attacks have become a strategic challenge for global trade and an ever-growing threat to international security. Against this backdrop, the Council is preparing to renew and modify the sanctions regime originally designed to limit the flow of weapons into Yemen. But will it be enough? Will it be enforceable? Will it deter anyone? Those are the questions hovering unspoken as delegates raise their eyes toward the President of the Council. The chamber doors briefly open as final representatives walk in and a hush falls across the room. The monthly President of the Council calls the meeting to order. The discussion is brisk. Every delegation understands the urgency and every word is carefully measured. For months, several Council members have pushed for stricter controls, expanded designations, and stronger mechanisms to curb not only the transfer of weapons, but the components that make advanced weapons systems possible. Others, meanwhile, have warned that additional pressure may destabilize the delicate political landscape in Yemen and further complicate diplomatic efforts. And then comes the moment of the vote, one that many observers have anticipated with a mix of hope and scepticism as the President calls for those in favour to raise their hands. A slow wave of arms lifts around the circular table. Representatives from Africa, Europe, Latin America and the United States nod in agreement. The motion clearly has support. No hands rise in outright opposition. But two delegations, the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, remain still as the call for abstentions is made. Their silence is a message of its own, a signal of reservations about what they consider an imbalance in the Council's approach, and a criticism of what they repeatedly describe as insufficient flexibility toward all parties to the conflict. With the tally complete, the Council President reads the result. 13 votes in favour, none against, 2 abstentions. The resolution passes. For another year, through November 2026, the sanctions regime will remain active, renewed and reinforced. It maintains asset freezes and travel bans on a list of individuals that currently includes several senior Houthi officials and entities linked to the movement. It opens the door to future sanctions on anyone involved in cross-border ballistic missile launches or attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. And crucially, it directs member states to intensify efforts to prevent the trafficking of weapons components, particularly dual-use materials that can be adapted for missile systems and drones, technologies that have transformed the Houthis from a militia into a regional actor with expanding reach. But even as many Council members approve the resolution, the abstentions speak loudly. Russia's Deputy Permanent Representative Anna Evsteneva reiterates her delegation's position. Moscow does not oppose the renewal of sanctions per se, but believes the Council is failing to address the broader dynamics of the conflict. She indicates that any actions targeting the Houthis must consider the humanitarian situation, the political vacuum, and the need to prevent measures that might hinder prospects for negotiated peace. The Russian delegation's message is clear. Unilateral pressure alone will not stabilize Yemen. China echoes similar concerns, cautioning against steps that could be interpreted as one-sided or inflammatory. Yet for those representing countries alarmed by maritime insecurity, the resolution is a necessary reaffirmation of international norms. The attacks on shipping have threatened global trade routes, driven up insurance costs, endangered civilian crews, and complicated relief operations. In their view, even an imperfect resolution is better than silence, and today's message needs to be heard not only in New York but in Sana'a. Thousands of kilometers away in Yemen's capital, the atmosphere is decidedly different. Streets in Sana'a have been crowded with large Houthi-organized demonstrations fueled by anger, grief, and calls for retaliation. Video imagery from the recent rallies shows supporters waving weapons in the air, Kalashnikovs, rifles, even anti-aircraft guns. Chants of defiance echo through the crowds, rippling across the open squares. Supporters raise posters of their leaders and fallen commanders, including Major General Mohammed al-Gamari, the Houthi chief of staff whose death in an Israeli airstrike triggered widespread mourning and a surge of mobilization. The demonstrations are choreographed displays of both loyalty and power, signaling that the movement's military wing retains broad support among its base. Each raised weapon is not just a symbol, it is a message directed outward to adversaries near and far. To Israel, to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates, and to Western naval coalitions patrolling the waters of the Red Sea. But it is also a message to the international community, to the UN, and even to the Security Council convening in New York. The message is the Houthis will not retreat in the face of external pressure. In these images from Sana'a, the emotional intensity is visible in every expression, every chant. The crowd swells as the news of the slain commander's death spreads, consolidating the narrative that the Houthis frame for their supporters, that they are part of a broader regional battle, standing in opposition to powerful states and presenting themselves as defenders of Palestinian rights. For their base, this is not merely rhetoric. It is a central part of the movement's identity, one that fuels recruitment, fundraising, and a sense of moral purpose. But the reality, as diplomats know, is more complicated. The Houthi attacks, particularly on maritime routes, have had severe global consequences. Since late 2023, cargo ships, oil tankers, and even vessels unrelated to the Gaza conflict have been targeted or forced to reroute, causing millions in damages and disrupting supply chains. Western navies have responded with expanded patrols. Several attacks have been intercepted, but others have succeeded. The dynamic has transformed what was once a localized civil war into a conflict with global implications. This growing tension is exactly why the Security Council has reinforced the sanctions framework, because the weapons enabling these attacks are not manufactured solely within Yemen. Despite the embargo, components continue to enter the country. Smuggling networks across land and sea have become increasingly sophisticated, using smaller vessels, concealed cargo, falsified manifests, and clandestine routes. According to several council members, these networks are what allow the Houthis to maintain a missile and drone arsenal capable of threatening regional and international interests. Today's resolution calls for what many describe as the most urgent step, a deeper, more coordinated approach to enforcing the embargo. Member states are instructed to improve intelligence sharing, especially regarding vessels suspected of transporting weapons or dual-use components. This includes better monitoring of maritime routes in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, as well as land corridors that cross into Yemen from neighbouring countries. The panel of experts is asked to produce recommendations on how to track the flow of such materials more effectively, recommendations that could shape future sanctions and policies. Meanwhile, the abstentions from Russia and China underscore a geopolitical divide. Both countries argue that sanctions are only one piece of the puzzle and that focusing exclusively on the Houthis risks oversimplifying a conflict driven by years of political exclusion, humanitarian suffering and foreign intervention. For them, isolating the Houthis without addressing grievances of all parties fails to create space for peace. Their message is not one of support for Houthi actions, but a critique of what they see as an unbalanced approach. Still, the passage of the resolution demonstrates that a large majority of the Council believes action is necessary. The United Kingdom, United States, and several European and African nations emphasize that the world cannot allow maritime threats to escalate further. They point to the destabilizing nature of cross-border missile launches and drone strikes attacks that have targeted not only military bases but civilian infrastructure, airports, desalination plants and commercial vessels. Yet, even as diplomats insist on the importance of pressure, they acknowledge that sanctions alone will not resolve Yemen's conflict. The war has fragmented the country, displaced millions, and created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. International aid agencies repeatedly warn that without a broader political settlement, no resolution from New York will stop the suffering on the ground. The Council itself recognises this, calling for renewed diplomatic efforts, humanitarian access and negotiations that include all major actors. In Sana'a, though, the atmosphere remains defiant. The crowds shown in recent footage chant in a rhythm that reflects both anger and resolve. Many of them carry images of fallen leaders, symbols that reinforce a narrative of martyrdom and resistance. The death of al-Gamari has been treated not as a setback, but as a rallying call, a moment used by Houthi leaders to strengthen their base and project military endurance. The large gatherings demonstrate an intersection of grief and mobilization. For the Houthis, the public display of support is a strategic asset, showing not only that their forces remain intact, but that popular support can fill the streets at a moment's notice. Diplomats observing this from afar understand what those images mean. Pressure from the Security Council may increase, but the Houthis are unlikely to change course immediately. The group has survived nearly a decade of airstrikes, blockades, shifting alliances and political isolation. It has expanded its military capabilities through a combination of local manufacturing, foreign technical support and a decentralized command structure. For many analysts, this resilience is precisely why the Council views embargo enforcement as critical. Without external supply routes, the Houthis' capacity to build advanced weapons systems could slow significantly. But there is a long road between adopting a resolution and achieving compliance. Monitoring maritime routes requires ships and aircraft. Inspecting cargo requires cooperation. Detecting smuggling operations requires intelligence. And enforcing sanctions requires political will, especially in a region with complex alliances and rivalries. Still, the Council's action today signals that the international community is determined to address the threat. It is a reminder that while diplomatic disagreements exist, there remains broad consensus that the attacks cannot continue unchecked. The passage of the resolution is an attempt to restore a measure of stability to a region where instability has become increasingly contagious. As the meeting in New York adjourns, Council members file out of the chamber, some stopping briefly to speak with journalists, others heading straight to their missions. The mood is sober. No one expects this resolution to end the war. No one thinks it will resolve Yemen's political fragmentation or address the humanitarian catastrophe overnight. But it does reaffirm a global commitment to curbing the flow of weapons and deterring actions that endanger international shipping and regional security. In Yemen, life goes on under the shadow of conflict. In Sana'a, in Taiz, in Hodeidah, and in the mountains of Sada, families continue to navigate shortages, inflation, and the consequences of a divided country. While today's developments in New York may seem distant, their ripple effects eventually reach Yemen's people, sometimes in the form of aid, sometimes in the form of pressure, sometimes in ways that offer hope, and sometimes in ways that deepen uncertainty. The international community continues to struggle with the same dilemma that has persisted for years: how to hold actors accountable while still fostering a path toward peace, how to enforce embargoes without worsening humanitarian suffering, how to address regional tensions without allowing them to ignite new conflicts, and how to balance immediate security concerns with long-term political resolution. Today's vote will be analysed by governments, by experts, by the Houthis themselves, and by those affected on the ground. Supporters of the resolution will argue that it is a necessary step to curb destabilising behaviour. Critics will warn that it may harden positions and complicate diplomatic engagement. But for now, the resolution stands as the Security Council's latest attempt to assert international norms and constrain actions that threaten global stability. As the images from Sana'a show, weapons raised and voices chanting, the contrast between diplomatic deliberation and street-level mobilization becomes strikingly clear. One world operates in formal statements and votes. The other expresses its message through armed demonstrations and mass gatherings. Both worlds reflect the enduring complexity of Yemen's conflict, its local roots, its regional entanglements, and its global implications. And so, as another year of sanctions begins, the world watches closely. Whether the renewed measures will succeed, whether they will shape behaviour or deter attacks, and whether they will open or close doors for diplomacy, all of this remains uncertain. What is certain is that the conflict in Yemen continues to shape regional dynamics, influence global trade, and challenge the mechanisms of international governance. The Security Council has spoken, but the response, military, political, and human, will unfold far from New York, in the streets of Yemen, in the waters of the Red Sea, and across a region where every action reverberates far beyond its borders. The world now waits to see what comes next.